All right. Excuse me. Today, guys, we're going to be talking about style. Style is a word that we use a lot when we're talking about art, and that's what we're going to be working on for our next project. So, we're going to really break it down and try to see if we can put this in as plain of language as we can. Um, So, if you look up art style, what it says is the manner in which the artist portrays his or her subject matter and how the artist expresses his or her vision. Style is determined by the characteristics that describe the artwork, such as the way the artist employs form, color, and composition. So, what does that mean? Let's simplify it. So, style is how the artist depicts or departs from reality. So, we're starting with realism, which, yes, is one of the hardest styles to work with. But any departure that you make from that realism is how the art is stylized. And we're going to look at a lot of examples of this to kind of help show you different styles and how you describe styles. The other thing that's really important is as we're talking about style, you have to know what subject matter is. Subject matter is just a big fancy word for what are you looking at. So, what is the artist showing you? That's the subject matter. Is it a portrait of a person? Well, the subject matter is a person. Or is it a still life with a lot of objects? The subject matter is a still life with those objects. So, if you had to guess where this work was from, where would you guess where this work was from? And yes, this is a video, so it's a little rhetorical, but if you look, we see some hieroglyphics in the background. We see these like really iconic kind of figures and shapes. We can pretty safely assume this is ancient Egyptian. And guess what, guys? We're correct. It is ancient Egyptian. But if you were to go and really break down what makes this work Egyptian, what you're doing is you're describing the style of the Egyptian artists. So here are some ways that we can see. And this is another Egyptian work. And we're going to look at how they're similar. And this is really kind of important from ancient Egypt because if you look, their style didn't change. They really prided themselves that they had this consistent style. This was done almost 2,000 years after this one. So you can really see how they valued style and how they incorporated it. First, figures are in profile view, so they're all looking to the side. We don't see straight on views of their face. All appendages are present. They thought that if you were drawn without an arm or a leg, then you wouldn't have that in the afterlife. So they contorted their bodies in weird ways to make sure that they showed you all of the limbs. They do have accurate proportions as far as the head size and everything. They are stylized. They're not super realistic. They have these really like narrow torsos. Since they're all profile view, they have this really stylized depiction of an eye. They're in very static poses. They're using hierarchical scale, which hierarchical scale here is you see how this guy's really big and this guy's small. And that just means he is more important than the little feller over there. And they are not just floating in the matrix, as Van Horn likes to call it. There is a figure ground relationship. So this is sort of like a real in-depth look at a certain style, but this is to kind of get you thinking about, okay, this is not realistic. How is it not realistic, and how can you connect it to other artworks that are similar? So one of the big references that we're going to be using to talk about style is from Scott McCloud, who wrote the book Understanding Comics, The Invisible Art. Huge surprise going to comics. But he really he dissects comic books to like a microscopic level and kind of leaves no stone unturned, which means not necessarily the most fun book to read, and it's not all super accurate, but he's got some great picture charts about style. We're just going to kind of adapt how we are, kind of the verbiage that we're using to look at this. So if you look down in this corner here, we are starting in reality. Very realistic. And then we have where it's, we can kind of tell that it's made, it looks like it's probably done with like some graphite shading, but it looks like it's shaded. It doesn't look like photo real. It's close to it. Then we have line work, which this includes like some shading. It's more stylized than this because instead of doing gradual shading, we're using lines, which lines don't exist in real life. It's all about edges. Then a little less realistic, and then like we know that this is a face because of what we call visual language. It's shaped like a head. It has two eyes and a mouth. We can deduct that that is a face. Now, one thing that we're really going to be looking at, so this is kind of like how stylized is it going to be? And then from here up, we're going to be looking at this true departure from reality. And this is more about artistic choices and artistic decisions. So this is almost like a sliding scale to abstraction, which we will talk about more. Here is like a bigger and better picture that kind of shows. So we have realism. We're replacing the gradual shading with lines. Now we are really taking some shortcuts on the eyes, really. And then we have that super minimal version over here. And we're not going to be playing in this field, but anything else is kind of going to be fair game in what we're doing. So now we get to talk about some more big fancy words: non-representational or non-objective, or representational or objective. So these words, non-representational, non-objective, are interchangeable, at least as far as I'm concerned, and representational and objective are also interchangeable. So if I flip-flop back and forth on those words, that's why. It's because they pretty much mean the same thing. So we're going to kind of dive into that. So representational art, or we're going to talk about these in relation to abstraction, because we know that representational art is representing something. Pretty much everything except for this up here is representing something. This is non-objective, but it is starting from reality. So representational, it starts with something. So representational or objective abstraction begins in reality. That means that even if it becomes a bunch of lines and shapes, it started somewhere. And that's kind of the path we're going to be going. And it's abstraction is really trying to seek the essence of the subject matter, and it can be expressed through simplification, stylization, fragmentation, reassembly, and or distortion. At the end of this slideshow, I kind of walk you through all of these big fancy words, but we're going to look at one example, and that is Picasso's Guernica. So very stylized, very abstracted. But he's still working from reality, and he is still depicting things or subject matter that we can identify. We see a light bulb. We see a horse, even though I don't think I've ever seen a horse that looked quite like that. If you had to guess what that was, what do you think it would be? That's right. It's a bull. How can you tell it's a bull? Well, it's got horns. It's got that bull nose and mouth. What looks super weird about it? The eyeballs. The eyes are like people eyes. So one of the things that the early abstraction or abstract artists did is they tried to figure out how little visual information they could give us and we would still know what we were looking at. So Picasso wanted to say, how could I show the essence of a bull? Well, here's the essence of a bull. We got the body, we got the head, we got the face. Not super accurate, but we get the point. Now, this is different because there's also non-representational or non-objective abstraction. This is abstraction that does not start from regular subject matter. P.A. Mondrian is an example of non-representational art. He's not trying to show us anything. He's trying to share an idea or a feeling through these basic elements of art. We have color, we have line, we have shape, and he is, which I'm not saying there's not any meaning behind this, because there is, but I'm just saying this is non-representational because he didn't start from something and abstract it down. Now, for the next project, you are going to be working in two different styles. The first style that I want you to work in is a representational or objective style. That means that I want you to look up one of these or a different style if you so choose. I chose some good examples of representational styles. Impressionism, you can see the focus is really on color. Pop art is kind of this like simplification, abstraction, trying to really emphasize everyday objects or products. Sorry, Marilyn, not calling you an object, just pop culture. We have surrealism, where it looks realistic, but it is not realistic. So melting clocks are a great example of that. If a clock was to melt, I don't think that it would melt over a tree branch like that, but it's painted in a way with shading, with texture, with depth, that it still looks real. Here is cubism. Now, cubism is going to be on both slides because we can see this is a portrait of a guy. It has discernible subject matter. But the artist is still really focused on shading, not accurate shading. See, it's dark here, light here. there, and I'll kind of show you my example. I did a cubist for my representational, so I'll be able to talk about that better on my example. And then we have expressionism. So really expressive with the lines, may not be the best choice for colored pencil because it's really painterly, but I want you guys to look up art styles and choose one representational art style to work with. Now, first drawing, the goal was realism. I know realism's difficult, so now I want us to kind of use your first picture and create a drawing in another style. So instead of looking at your original object that you drew, you're going to refer back to your original, or the picture that you drew, not the object itself. So now we're not doing an observational drawing. You're using your first drawing as a guide for your second. So when I say research the style of your choice, what I mean is that if you look up one of these, you know how you're going to make your art cubist, or if you're going to make your art impressionistic for your second version. Okay. You'll use your first sketch to inspire a new design based off of a representational style. So it'll still look like your object, just in a different, distinct style. And, you know, this is like a little mini series that we're doing. So you should still be able to recognize the original artwork that yours is based on. So, you might stick with the same color palette. Make sure that there's a strict visual adherence from one image to the next. So I was telling you guys about how I made this cubist. Well, let me point out how I did that. So on my original one, which I don't have on this slideshow, what I did, I drew the image out again, and I kind of just divided it up. So I was like, all right, dark green was there, light green was there, and tried to kind of fracture it as much as I could. I tried to really emphasize these dark areas and kind of really emphasize the shape. So because I really wanted to play around with the shapes and the colors, but still maintaining a representational or objective style where we can still tell it's one of them Christmas bows. Now, for your second one, you are going to choose a non-representational or non-objective style. Now, I wanted to make sure that we talked about some of this stuff before we got here, because this is cubism, and so was that picture of the man that we looked at. You know, these are all different types of abstract art. Abstract art doesn't have to be non-representational or non-objective, but it also can be. So here's an example of cubism where you can see that they're still playing around with the shading and the shapes. You could probably try to guess what that was a picture of if we wanted to, but it's not like super clear. There's constructivism, which is kind of breaking down some of these shapes. Abstract expressionism probably wouldn't go there for this one because, yet again, that's another very painterly style, but that's like Jackson Pollock, where it's more about the expression of the lines and the putting the paint on the canvas. And then just regular abstract, where It's kind of simplified to these different shapes and lines and colors. Now, a quick refresher on the elements of design and the principles, or the elements of art and the principles of design. Pretty much any thing that we look at is going to have all of these things. Abstract artists, and I'm going to kind of baby step you through abstraction because I lean towards realism in my art. So abstraction gets difficult for me. So I'm going to kind of show you how I go about doing this. So abstract artists they'll focus on just the elements. They'll only look at the line. They'll look at exploring different shapes, different colors, different textures. So if you're drawing something with really cool textures, you could really focus on that. If you've got some really like specific lines, you could focus on those lines. Color is the big one because, this is our first kind of foray into color this year. So you want to make sure that you're carrying those colors from your first image into your next one. Space and value. Since I really like shading on mine, I played around with shading a lot. And the ones that I really focused on were line, shape, value, and color. Now, you can still have pattern, contrast, emphasis, all these principles, but it's all about these are what you use on your paper, and this is how you use them. So your second drawing is going to be a non-representational abstraction. So abstract art is a departure from realistic imagery to focus on the elements. Broken record over here. So what you're going to do is you're going to use one of your first two sketches to create a non-objective, non-representational composition. We're using the word composition because you're not drawing anything in particular. You are just focusing on how you can make that interesting on the paper. That also means that on this one, it needs to be a full page composition. You're going to choose which elements of the picture you want to focus on, and you want to reimagine the elements of art over representation. So you don't want to show whatever you did for a third time, but you will want to focus on just the colors, the shapes, the lines. And since it's part of a series, you should be able to recognize the original artwork that yours is based on. Now, in going about doing something like this, I'm going to go back to the other slide so that I can show you how I go about doing it. This is not how you have to. But for someone who has trouble with abstract art, and I'm talking about myself, I'm going to show you how I went about doing it. So, and there's a slide that kind of walks you through some of these. But what I did, I chose a portion of my picture that I thought was interesting, and I reimagined it. So this really dark shape right here, I kind of chose to focus on that and then focus on these different colors and values. So this really dark shape, that is just like really magnified version of those dark shapes from my original one. And then I just kind of tried to replicate those shapes, play around with my shading. It's okay if you have some negative space in here. This is just white because, your other pictures, they don't have backgrounds. And, for this exercise, that's okay. But that's how I went about doing mine. You don't have to have like a consistent light source. So you can see like this shading is going from light to dark. It's going from dark to light, dark to light. There's no consistency. This is where you're really going to get to play with the materials and the shapes without trying to be bound to realism. Now, these are some different abstraction techniques. Simplify it, stylize it, fragment it, reassemble it. That's something that Picasso would do a lot, where he would take all the different features and sort of remix them all together in a different way, or distortion. If you get stuck here, what I would do is go to one of your pictures, zoom in on an aspect that you think is visually interesting, and explore that on your page. Now, we'll have a week to do your drawing in another style. You will have to tell me which style you worked in, and then we'll spend another week playing around with the abstraction drawing. So yes, this is a long video, but this is for the next 2 weeks and showing you how you're going to build this off of your original image. Now, I will be getting back to you guys with feedback on how you're using the Prisma, so I can kind of help guide you in the right direction on how you can maximize your the different effects that you get. So this will be posted as a video on Schoology, but I'll also have this broken down for where you will turn your images in. And as always, if y'all have any questions, please let me know.